Welcome back to my channel. My name is MsNoBuntu, DIVA, a divinely inspired, vibrantly anointed artist. This is part 3 of Dirty Laundry, but the unfinished business of the dirty laundry. And this is the Giles family came back. And so if you have not seen the latest videos that I have put up, go up here or in the description section and you will see part 1 and part 2 there. Let me just again clarify. Go to the episode and watch, and then come back on here and listen to the insights and the thoughts and the light bulbs that I am here to share with you. So the next day, obviously, Iyanla meets with different parts of the family, different members of the family, just to gauge what light bulbs they've had since the day before. And first meets with Jordan, and and his whole attitude is like, I don't really care about, she asked, how do you feel about it? I don't really care. He's just over it generally. And his whole thing is, I'm here for a check, and Iyanla says, well, you're here for a check, but I'm going to be here for you, because getting to the point where you're so indifferent that you don't care anymore tells me that there's a sense of you feeling like no one is there for you. So I'm going to be here for you so that I can break the pathology of I don't care and nobody can tell me what to do. And in this conversation that Iyanla has with Jordan, offers to have a private conversation with him. No microphones, no cameras were involved, so we don't know what they talked about. But also what came up were pathologies that she identified that are coursing through in this family and in this family dynamic from generation to generation to generation. And there are 5 of them. 1, abandonment. 2nd, neglect, division, everyone is going to a separate place, and defensiveness, and then deprivation. Again, I'll go back to, it's important that she had the grandmother Dorothy watching all these conversations, so that Dorothy can have a clear illustration of how her actions trickled down from generation to generation, because Jordan is 2 generations from Dorothy, and going ahead and having children, Dorothy in her, where she was not healed, not over her stuff of her past, how then that brokenness and that trauma and that hurt, in whatever way that it was passed on, is passed on from generation to generation. And it doesn't originate with the subsequent generations, but from her, because she's at the top of the line. So it doesn't come from anywhere, but it comes from her. There's quite a bit of noise in the background, but if you can rock with me past that, let's continue. So what I think about this whole Jordan situation and him being so kind of blasé about where this opportunity that his family has to be able to sit with Iyanla and have all these issues that they have, and this dynamic that is toxic that they have, be studied, and the pathologies be picked out, and tools be designed for them in order for them to change the trajectory of their course. I think the reason he's here is very reminiscent of where Marc Jr. got to, where he left. He got to a point where he left because his life was in danger, and obviously at that point they didn't have this kind of opportunity. But I think it's very, for me, like yet another pathology that's repeating itself, where the son is in so much contention with his dad, with his whole family, and the dynamic of what he thinks of his family. I think there's also things that he thinks about his family. I think there's a hidden sort of misrepresentation about this family, how they represent themselves versus how they are, that is really just irking him and disgusting him. I could be absolutely wrong, but I get that sense as well from how he's like so over it. I get a sense that he sees that his family is showing up at the show and is pretending to be a family that they're not, and they putting on only so much for the help, but not the whole picture for what it really is. And so I think he's over it, and he's at that place where Marc Jr. was at when he decided to leave for his health, for his safety, for his own growth, for his own peace. Except he doesn't have the means, he doesn't have the hustle within him, he doesn't have that strong will within him to, just the mere fact of having such an entitlement to a check means that he doesn't have the hustle in him that Marc Jr. had, and that kind of courage that would say, I will leave and I will go without. So he's still in that place of being, I guess, maybe stuck in, oh, I can't go anywhere, but I really want to go. I want to be out of here. So that's what I think about his indifference and his blasé attitude. I don't know. What do you think? Tell me down below. All right. So next up, Iyanla sits with Marc Sr. and they have a conversation, and he tells, her different stories about when he was 14 years old. A friend burglared his house and he went to find that friend and beat that friend up. And as a result of that, he was sent to reform school when he was 17. He was running around with, different guys, and he got into some kind of real trouble, and he was in jail for some time for that, But this story, what he tells, it explains the pivotal points in his life. For me, explains the pivotal points in his life that led him to being such a hard man, such a roaring lion presence, and the kind of issues that he's having to learn to undo and work through and approach differently now. This conversation with Iyanla, for me, of his history and his story, explains him. It explains where he's coming from, what happened to him, what were the pivotal points that led him to being the way that he is. And it's not to excuse it, of course, but it's to create a big picture with full details, or at least most of the details, so that, okay, it's clear where the breaks happened in his life that steered him towards a specific way of being that he shows up in, that now it's clear that that was for survival back then, but now he is not in survival, and he has to be a different way in order to get back to himself. And I thought this was a very interesting conversation because, in your context of your story, there are those pivotal points. And they, like I said, they're very much driven by survival. But when you're no longer in survival mode, when you're no longer in danger, when you're no longer under that kind of threat, how do you then readjust an attitude of being in survival mode, How do you then not let that environment mold you for the rest of your life, but that, okay, you can mold me for this part of my life, but for the rest of my life, I still have different choices to make so that I can show up as a different and better and more even palatable version of myself, a likable version even to myself, and a version of myself that doesn't make everybody else walk on eggshells around me, but a version of myself that's approachable and that is open, and where people can come near me and not feel afraid of me, and where I can state where I stand in my views, but I'm not roaring over everyone and everyone keeps quiet, but that I can do that and I'm in conversation and dialogue with people in a healthy way this time around, because I'm no longer in a hostile environment. I'm in a healthy environment, and therefore I'm going to be a different person for a healthy environment. The story of abandonment is also explained here, that, you know, he did all of this, you know, being a hustler basically. He did all of this to help his mom and provide for his mom. And then his mom, you know, he says the response that he got was that his mom met a man and moved away with this man, and he was not allowed to come. And he says that he cursed her when he did that, you know, because obviously that felt like an abandonment for him and neglect for him. And a division, I would even say that a division between a mother and his son caused by a third party coming in, and that third party not being properly introduced. And it's interesting, that's also where the pathology is, that the mother didn't properly introduce or introduce in a tactful way, in a tactful manner, this man that came into the picture, that had all her attention all of a sudden. And yet Dorothy is complaining about the very same thing when it comes to the arrival of Jamila. Her complaint and her grievance is that, you know, it was just me and you before she came, and now she came into the picture and suddenly you all were married. And as I said in my earlier parts, is that, you know, it's because this woman was not properly integrated and introduced into this picture. But he got that from somewhere. He got it from Dorothy, his mother, when she did that and neglected him and abandoned him to be with a man, and he couldn't even come along, you know. So it's interesting how these, again, going back to, it was an amazing idea to have the grandmother Dorothy watch this entire these conversations with the different members, to see how the pathology carries over and flows over and manifests in different contexts, in different ways, in the other people's lives as a result of things she's done and how she was, you know. And that these are not things that have nothing to do with her, that she can now claim an involvement with, but these are things that absolutely have everything to do with her, you know. So this meeting with Marc Senior is followed with a sit down with Dorothy. Again, the story of Dorothy comes out there, and it comes, you know, the way it can be summed up is that, you know, for Dorothy, the choices she made were a sum total of the fact that she wasn't raised. She just grew up. And so she was just doing the best that she knew how, based on not being taught, but just having grown up, and figuring it out as she went along. And Iyanla's suggestion, as they move towards a time where they will probably all have to sit together and have conversations then with each other after having told these stories that contextualize why do you behave the way you do. Iyanla tells her that she's going to have to hear some things and not say anything, so that to level the playing field, and respond only with what can I do to make it better now, you know, and apologize and say, what can I do to make it better now? And I think that's the thing when you're dealing with a parent figure, a grandmother figure. There has to be a point where the level field is is leveled. I mean, the field is leveled out, because then there's always this defensiveness that you're dealing with, or this woundedness that they can go into, that you having to contend with, and so you don't tell your whole truth as a child who had to be at the receiving end of the actions of their brokenness, you know. And in order to be able to give that grace, you have to give that permission. You have to be willing then to sit through hearing the whole truth and nothing but the truth, the unsweetened truth, the undistorted truth, the not candy coated truth, and just take it in and hear it. And your only response be to apologize and to say, how can I make it better now? And not for your response to be to try to explain your story in this moment. Because if there is a elder and a younger, it's not necessarily fair for the younger to be put in a position to have to then take into consideration the elder's story at the cost of their experience of the actions of the elder. Iyanla's next sit down is with Ashley, the sister who comes after Marc Jr. and who is Marc Jr.'s biological sister, and they have a different mother. The first mother who was addicted to drugs. Keep following me here. So let me tell you what happens at the end of the conversation. I think what happens in Iyanla's eyes is that she identifies Ashley as the key to breaking the curses in this family, or the negative patterns in this family. Ashley has a level head on her shoulders, and she has some discernment, and she can really see what's really going on, and is doing her best, using even the tools from the last time that she was at the Iyanla show to do better in her life, because she then discovered better last time. And it's you can see it, it shows, you can feel it in her energy. She has a more peaceful energy than everybody else. She has a more there's something about her energy that's just more open, a more open heart, a willingness to be vulnerable heart out of everyone in the family who has come back, and even from before. And in her, I believe Iyanla identified that this is where the healing would spread out from. If it can benefit the family, she can do what she needs to do for her own family. If her family of origin doesn't want it, but it would spread out from her, because she has the most tools and the most fortitude within herself for the work that is ahead, for the unlearning and the healing and the breaking of those negative patterns to happen. But this is what happens in their conversation. Obviously the mother was an addict, so comes up that a broken mother will create broken children. And she is asked why she sees herself as the black sheep of the family, and she talks about how she feels like she's never been seen or heard, and stayed back and away. And as a way, when you do that, when you never seen, never heard, and you stay back and you kind of float around the picture, that's a form of abandonment. It distorts her out of the picture, because she's like, okay, I'm going to skirt around the edges here while she watches all these dynamics unfold. And in that craziness of the dynamic, she gets abandoned, because she's not necessarily playing into that, but she's watching it. You know how these kind of dynamics are. If you don't play in with them, and if you don't participate in them, then you're not part of the, you're not part of the inner circle, you're not part of the clique. And what happens is that you get abandoned, you get ousted, and you just end up at the peripheries, just watching and just minding your business, and then you distorted out of the picture. She talks about how their mother, Ashley and Marc's mother, would leave them in the apartment for 2 weeks, and they would just have no food, and they would have to help each other. But then she goes back and says, but our mother loved us. We never had a doubt about our mother loving us. But, she had this drug she had this drug issue, and she would just disappear for 2 weeks at a time, and we wouldn't know where she was, and we would just be left to take care of ourselves. And Iyanla brings her to an understanding of even her distorted understanding of what love is, and brings her to the understanding that her distortion of love is a mother who would leave her for 2 weeks at a time with no food and leave her to fend for herself, and that if anything is a love deprivation, and it's not love when she shows up. If anything, that's actually what I would call a trauma bond. It's not love in the true sense of the word love. There's no love in leaving your children for 2 weeks and then showing up after 2 weeks, after you finished your drug binge or whatever, wherever she was, or whatever it is that she had finished doing after being gone for 2 weeks. Her children, no food and no way to take care of themselves, but probably have to steal and just, hustle and make things happen to survive. And I would say this is also like a way of bringing her out of the distortion of survival, bringing her to that knowledge of this, your cup of love is really empty, and you were really abandoned, you were really deprived of true love in the sense of the action, and the sense of the action of love. It helps bring her to a different view of what is the truth about what is love, what is the truth about what she included or excluded, I really liked Ashley. I really liked her energy, and I really liked that her heart was open, and she was just really vulnerable and leaned into the process in an extraordinary way that everyone else wasn't necessarily, not to compare. And I really believe that she got the most out of attending both times last season in season 7 and coming back again in season 8. And she's getting the most out of this process. Her breakthrough is coming, or has come. And I really believe that the change of trajectory, she's the poster child for the change of trajectory when it comes to the dynamic of this family. I absolutely believe that. Iyanla tells Ashley at the end of their conversation that, or encourages her to really do it different and break the negative patterns, break the curse. And she really just relies on Ashley to break the curse, because she says Ashley is really the only one present out of all of everyone who has shown up to come back again for another episode. She's the only one that's really fully present, and I absolutely agree. Her energy was absolutely different from everybody else's, and like I said before, she probably got the most out of this healing process, and it's going to help her the most.